You know what I mean? Because like we went out, I think we were like 17th, and we were just like we knew we had no shot at like a top five. He's as good as Bubba is there, or as fast. But we're like, if we can qualify in the top 15, that at least gets us a decent pit selection.
What if the biggest threat to Bubba Wallace's championship dreams wasn't a rival team? It was himself. One split second, one violent shove on lap 323 at Martinsville Speedway, and suddenly, NASCAR royalty, the legendary Richard Petty himself, is on a podcast calling it exactly what it looked like: deliberate, reckless, and very costly. Buckle up, because this story goes deeper than one bad Sunday. We're talking jealousy, internal pressure, a crumbling points lead, and a man unraveling in real time. Stay with us. The wreck that shocked Martinsville, March 29th, 2026. The Cookout 400 at Martinsville Speedway, NASCAR's oldest track. A tight little half-mile paperclip where tempers get compressed just as much as sheet metal. Bubba Wallace, driving the number 23 Toyota for 23X1 Racing, was having the kind of afternoon where nothing goes right. His car was hovering in the 12th to 15th position range all day. A frustrating no-man's land for a driver who came into race day sitting third in the Cup Series standings. Then came the lap 323 restart, and everything changed. Going into turn 3, Wallace nudged the rear bumper of Carson Hocevar's number 77 Chevrolet. That alone, on a track like Martinsville, might have been forgiven as close-quarters racing. But Bubba didn't stop there. He hit him again, harder, through the middle of the corner. Hocevar's car snapped sideways, and just like that, multiple cars were tangled in a violent pileup. Smoke, carnage, chaos. Hocevar somehow, miraculously, managed to keep going. Bubba Wallace? He was done. P36. Last among the classified finishers. A ruined race day, a ruined weekend, and, as it would turn out, a potentially season-defining catastrophe. Chase Elliott went on to claim the victory, with Denny Hamlin, co-owner of 23X1 Racing, crossing the line in second. The irony of Hamlin watching his own driver self-destruct while he himself finished on the podium was not lost on anyone. And here's the thing about Martinsville Speedway: it doesn't lie. This track exposes drivers. There's no hiding behind horsepower, no escaping into clean air for long stretches. It's elbows out, brake-heavy, emotion-packed racing where patience is just as important as aggression. And that's why this moment stood out. Because veterans know, you don't just keep hitting a guy in the same corner unless you're sending a message. One bump? Racing. Two bumps in the same sequence? That's intent, or, at the very least, a complete loss of control. Even the onboard cameras told a story. The throttle stayed planted longer than expected. The angle of entry looked deeper than normal. And the contact? It escalated, not faded. That's what made people pause. Because in a sport where milliseconds matter, those tiny decisions don't happen by accident. They happen in the heat of emotion. And suddenly, the question wasn't just what happened. It was why did it happen that way? What made it worse, and what made it viral, was that Bubba's post-race explanation left more questions than answers. Standing on pit road, mic in his face, he told Fox Sports reporter Jamie Little that he had misjudged the situation, explaining that he hadn't properly anticipated the entry into the corner and had misjudged the center of the turn, insisting he never intended to wreck him. A misjudgment. That's the word he chose. But the replay shows not one careless bump. It shows two hard, deliberate hits. The kind of hits that made broadcasters in the Fox booth go very, very quiet before they started choosing their words carefully. The garage started buzzing. Fans were losing their minds on social media. And then, the voice that carries more weight in this sport than almost any other decided to speak up. But who is this Richard Petty who spoke up? And why does his opinion carry so much weight? More on that in a moment. First, you need to understand the man at the center of all this, because Bubba Wallace's story starts long before Martinsville. From Mobile to the fast lane, the making of Bubba Wallace. Born October 8, 1993, in Mobile, Alabama, Bubba Wallace, real name William Darrell Wallace Jr., was practically destined for racing. His dad, Darrell Sr., loved speed, and by age 9, Bubba was already behind the wheel. Bandolero cars, Legends cars, late models, he didn't just compete, he dominated. By 12, he had racked up 35 wins in a single year. Let that sink in. Growing up in Concord, North Carolina, right in NASCAR's backyard, Bubba was immersed in racing culture. But he also stood out in a way that couldn't be ignored. He was black, in a sport that had historically lacked diversity. Through NASCAR's Drive for Diversity program, he carved his way forward, and in 2010 became the first African-American to win Rookie of the Year in the K&N Pro Series East. Then came the breakthroughs. In 2013, at Martinsville Speedway, he made history, becoming the first black driver in 50 years to win a National Series race. In 2018, he stunned the racing world by finishing second at the Daytona 500 in his first full Cup season, earning praise from legends like Hank Aaron. But 2020 changed everything. A noose discovered in his Talladega garage stall sparked one of the most emotional moments in NASCAR history, as drivers and crews rallied behind him in solidarity. Overnight, Bubba became more than a driver. He became a symbol. In 2021, he joined 23X1 Racing, co-owned by Michael Jordan and Denny Hamlin. He delivered, winning at Talladega, then Kansas in 2022, and in 2025, the iconic Brickyard 400, cementing his place in history. Which is why what happened at Martinsville feels so complicated, because there are two versions of Bubba Wallace: the barrier-breaking hero fans admire, and the frustrated competitor we saw erupt on lap 323. So what's really been building beneath the surface this season? And could the answer be closer to home than anyone expected? Richard Petty drops the hammer. If you want the unfiltered, unspun truth in NASCAR, there's really only one place to go. Not Twitter, not the PR machine. You go to the king, Richard Petty. Petty, a 7-time Cup Series champion and arguably the most decorated driver in NASCAR history, didn't hold back on his Petty Race Recap podcast following Martinsville. This is also the same man whose iconic number 43 car Bubba Wallace once drove. So this wasn't just any outside critic weighing in. During the discussion, co-host Dale Inman, Petty's longtime crew chief and one of the most respected minds in the sport, tried to soften the situation, suggesting that Wallace had kind of gotten into the number 77 of Carson Hocevar, implying it might have been minor contact, the kind you chalk up to hard racing. But Petty wasn't buying it. He pushed back immediately, making it clear that, from his perspective, Wallace hadn't just nudged Hocevar, he had driven deep into the corner and made heavy contact that sent the other car spinning. In Petty's eyes, this wasn't a racing incident that got out of hand. It was excessive, aggressive, and avoidable. And what made his reaction even more striking wasn't just the criticism, it was how fast it came. There was no hesitation, no waiting for multiple replays, no carefully worded response after reviewing every angle. For Petty, One look at the footage was enough to reach a conclusion. That matters, because Petty has seen everything in this sport: clean battles, retaliation moves, emotional overreactions, and calculated payback. So when someone with that level of experience calls something out so quickly, people tend to listen differently. It also adds a layer of irony that's hard to ignore, because in many ways, Petty played a role in shaping Wallace's early Cup career, which makes this moment feel less like distant criticism and more like a very public reality check. The reaction spread quickly across the NASCAR world. Fans, analysts, and insiders all weighed in, but Petty's voice carried the most weight. And he wasn't the only one speaking up. Because while Richard focused on what happened on the track, his son, Kyle Petty, started digging into something deeper, what might have been going on in Wallace's head long before that moment in Turn 3. The teammate problem nobody wants to talk about. Here's the part of this story that nobody inside the 23X1 racing garage was rushing to put on a podcast. Kyle Petty, speaking live on NASCAR's Inside the Race broadcast on Fox, went somewhere that was brave and a little uncomfortable. Bubba Wallace, he said, wasn't just frustrated with a bad race day. He was carrying something heavier, something Kyle called double frustration. The first layer of frustration was obvious enough. Wallace had been running in no man's land all afternoon at Martinsville, unable to make ground, watching his race slowly die. That kind of day wears on any driver. But the second layer, that one's far more revealing. Tyler Reddick, Wallace's own 23X1 teammate, had been absolutely on fire in the 2026 season. Reddick didn't just start the year well. He became the first driver in NASCAR Cup Series history to win the first 3 races of the season. He then won 4 of the first 6. 4 of 6. His car looked like it was being driven by a video game algorithm, and the entire sport was talking about it. And sitting inside the same team, sharing the same resources, the same manufacturer support, the same organizational structure, was Bubba Wallace. Watching all of it, Kyle Petty put it plainly, explaining that drivers always compete with their teammates internally, regardless of what anyone says, because everyone wants to be the best within their own team. And that kind of environment can naturally build frustration and pent-up anger that may surface during intense moments. He had been there himself. He knew what it felt like to watch a teammate outshine you while the cameras all pointed the other way. And when you're already having a rough Sunday, and the guy wearing the same colors as you is winning championships while you're stuck in 15th, it only takes one spark. And inside 23X1 racing, that internal competition isn't just implied, it's unavoidable. Every data sheet gets compared. Every lap time gets analyzed. Every adjustment is measured against your teammate. And when one side of the garage keeps hitting victory lane, while the other is fighting just to stay relevant in the race, it creates a silent tension that doesn't need to be spoken out loud. Drivers won't admit it publicly. Teams will downplay it in interviews, but it's there. Because in NASCAR, your first rival isn't the guy in another car. It's the one in identical equipment. Carson Hocevar, unfortunately, was the spark. Kyle Petty also defended Hocevar, explaining that he had recently become an easy target in the garage, where incidents involving him were often dismissed as deserved, but emphasized that in this particular case, he did not believe Carson Hocevar had done anything to warrant what happened. Taking someone 3 wide at Martinsville isn't a hanging offense, it's racing. Bubba knew that, and what he did anyway told the whole sport something about the state of his mind that afternoon. But the blowback didn't stop with the Petty family. When the man who spots your car for a living goes on a podcast and publicly tears apart your decision-making, you know things have gone very wrong. What did Freddie Kraft say? And just how bad was the damage to Bubba's championship hopes? Bubba's own camp turns up the heat. Freddie Kraft has been Bubba Wallace's spotter for years. He's the voice in Bubba's ear on race day, the man perched in the spotter's stand, calling traffic and keeping his driver out of trouble. He is, by definition, firmly in Bubba's corner, which is exactly what made his comments on the Door Bumper Clear podcast so jaw-dropping. Kraft didn't soften a single syllable. He explained that there was no sugarcoating the situation, adding that while he had to take Bubba Wallace at his word for saying he misjudged the move, it was clearly a very costly mistake that hurt the team, dropping them from third in the standings to effectively 11th, and emphasized that such errors simply cannot happen. He ultimately described the incident as self-inflicted. The numbers are brutal. Entering Martinsville, Wallace sat third in the Cup Series standings, a strong, enviable position for any championship contender heading into the heart of the season. After the wreck, he tumbled to 206 points, tied for 8th, but effectively 11th when you sort out the tiebreakers, in a single afternoon, at a single track. And here's what makes it sting even more. According to Kraft, Bubba's car was running around 12th or 15th all day before the incident. Not great, but survivable. In a points race, you take your 14th place finish and you live to fight another week. That's what championship-caliber teams do. Instead, 23X1 Racing went home with a DNF, a car in the wall, and a PR nightmare. Kraft was direct about what this means for the bigger picture, stressing that moments like that simply cannot happen if a driver wants to be a true championship contender or even remain in the top tier of the standings. Watching from the Fox booth as the replay unfolded, Kevin Harvick didn't need a podcast to weigh in. He said on air that Bubba Wallace had driven straight through the number 77 car and suggested that such aggression likely came from something that had happened earlier, concluding that Wallace was clearly angry. Harvick's red was surgical. Wallace wasn't just making a mistake, he was reacting emotionally. He had already been frustrated by the earlier three-wide moment, had been building tension throughout the race, and when the opportunity came with Carson Hocevar right in front of him, that frustration took over. The only voice offering any real leniency was analyst Steve Letarte, who suggested during the Fox broadcast that Wallace had likely misjudged how aggressively he was applying the throttle, adding that this kind of miscalculation is something that can happen at a track like Martinsville. But that was a lonely island in a flood of criticism. And notably, it was also back-to-back bad finishes for Wallace. A 34th at Darlington followed immediately by the 36th at Martinsville. The momentum he'd spent the early season building was evaporating fast. The question now isn't just whether Bubba can bounce back. It's whether the cracks showing at Martinsville reveal something deeper about his season, and whether the championship window that looked so wide a few weeks ago might already be starting to close. The reckoning. Can Bubba bounce back? Let's be fair to Bubba Wallace for a moment, because there is a real story here that the noise of Martinsville risks drowning out. Before March 29, he had looked genuinely dangerous in 2026. 5 top 11 finishes in the opening 6 races. A seat firmly planted in the top 3 of the standings. A 23X1 Racing team, now one of the deepest and best resourced outfits in the paddock, that clearly had the tools to compete for a title. Coming off his Brickyard 400 win in July 2025, Wallace wasn't just a feel-good story anymore. He was a legitimate threat. And Freddie Kraft made it clear that the team wasn't giving up, expressing confidence that they would figure things out and come back stronger the next time they hit the track. But here's the hard truth. The one the whole NASCAR world is now waiting to see play out. The sport's current point system has almost zero tolerance for emotional decisions. One bad race can cost you weeks of progress. Two bad races back-to-back can cost you the playoffs. And a moment where your own frustration with your own teammate bleeds into how you drive against someone else? That's not a racing incident. That's a psychological crack that opponents will exploit if they see it again. Richard Petty saw it clearly. Kyle Petty saw it clearly. Kevin Harvick saw it clearly. Freddie Kraft, from inside the garage, saw it clearly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Because the NASCAR garage has a long memory, drivers remember who races them clean and who doesn't. They remember moments like Martinsville. They remember who lost control when things didn't go their way. And the next time Bubba Wallace finds himself in tight traffic, fighting for position, you can bet the drivers around him will think twice. Will they give him space? Or will they race him harder, expecting another overstep? That's the ripple effect of one moment like this. It doesn't just impact your standings. It changes how the entire field reacts to you. And in a sport built on trust at 180 miles per hour, that might be the biggest consequence of all. The man who won the Brickyard. The man who became the first black driver to win a crown jewel race. The man who drove off Martinsville in 36th place. That man now has a decision to make. Not about his car setup or his pit strategy. About what's going on inside his helmet. Martinsville has always been a spiritual place for Bubba Wallace. He won his very first National Series race at this track back in 2013. He's had success there, built history there, but on March 29, 2026, Martinsville gave him something very different. A mirror. And what it reflected wasn't the champion he's been building toward. It was a driver under pressure, cracking at the seams. Whether he looks at that reflection and grows from it or runs from it will define everything about the second half of his 2026 season. So there you have it, Bubba Wallace's Martinsville meltdown, Richard Petty's no-nonsense verdict, and the simmering teammate tension inside 23x1 racing that nobody wants to admit is real. Is this just one rough weekend, or the beginning of a dangerous spiral? One thing's for sure. The 2026 NASCAR season just got a lot more interesting. If you're new here, smash that subscribe button, because we've got even more explosive NASCAR drama coming your way very soon. And trust us, you do not want to miss what's next.